Welcome, Tyler. Welcome back.
Well,
Appreciate
thank
you
you. Glad to be
coming
here.
back. Uh, I know we did a good job last time. Hopefully, we don't disappoint this time. Today, we're going to talk about how to improve message engagement, increase sales without sacrificing reputation. The without sacrificing reputation is kind of going to be a no-brainer to go along with this. But today, we're going to really be exploring what is the essence of marketing and sales, and the reason for this explanation is because I see too many people getting swept up in all the power and potential of marketing automation and sometimes missing the point entirely. So the hope is with this is we can rein back into what is the actual point of marketing and sales, and how do we make sure that when we're making selections of how we accomplish the mission of marketing and sales, that we do it in the most effective way possible. So we're trying to cast off old rules as much as we can. Keep the new, the ones that are useful, but the ones that aren't, let's cast them off and let's put some new rules in place that really get us an opportunity to shine. And what we found is as you put these new rules in place, you suddenly see great results, and that's the outcome we're looking for. So we're going to start, and this is kind of this box doesn't look very impressive, but this is a big deal, right? The purpose of marketing and sales is to get prospects to spend money and become customers. Fair enough?
Can I be critical, or you want to just
Yeah,
move
totally be critical.
Maybe this is where you're going, but I would say that the purpose of marketing and sales is to convey the value of what you sell, and then you better as heck deliver that value when you sell it.
Yeah. No, I think that's encapsulated inside of this phrase, but I'm glad you articulated that, because that's some people, that's a nuance that can be lost to them, and so they struggle. So
Yeah, because if I'm
definitely
not worried,
marketing and sales has to convey that value that you're bringing to the market so that it is matches with the expectation of benefits that the seller wants to get.
yeah, because if I'm not concerned about delivering value for the customer, the marketing and sales tactics I use are going to be very different. And just,
Sure.
yeah, I'm going to be sleazy and scammy and do whatever I can to collect
So I would
money.
almost put that as a sidebar to this, in the
Okay.
sense that this is the underlying assumption that both you and I have, because I'm glad you articulated that, because I take it for granted, right? And I know you know that that's the focus, is to deliver value. There's no long-term success in business that I've ever seen where there's not the exchange of value. It has to be real and felt by both parties in order for that business to be sustained. But at the end of the day, if marketing sales don't produce prospects that spend money and become customers, then it's failed in its purpose. So I think we can both, we have, and I'm glad you bring those points up, because that helps give a fuller picture for everybody. Now, how we spend our money is based on how we see the world. Any problems with that one?
Makes sense to me.
Yeah. To change how someone sees the world, start acting differently, we have to have a message that changes the way that they see the world. And a compelling message can change one's view if they engage with that message. Is that fair?
Yep.
I haven't jumped too far on anything.
Nope.
To get prospects to engage with my message, I must send my message to them. If I don't send it, there's no way it can engage. And I know you had lots of experience with people who, fret and worry about the message to the point that they never send it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
But you have to send it. Otherwise, there's no way, there's no chance if you don't send it that it can have an impact.
Right.
So you got to send the message some way. When they get my message, they will see the world differently.
Hopefully.
And that's kind of based on if the message is compelling,
right,
in some way. So there are some caveats there, and we'll get to those. There's another caveat I haven't mentioned. It's kind of a gotcha. I'll bring it up in a second. And when they see the world differently, they will buy. That's the goal, right? That's what we hope with marketing and sales, is that we can introduce a compelling message that will change the way they see the world, sufficient that they go, you know what? I need to be doing business with this company. This company is going to make a difference for me. But if we don't change the way someone sees the world, for sure they won't buy. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
So if there's no change in the way someone sees the world, there is little to no chance that they will change their behavior. And they especially won't change it to include our company if we can't introduce new information that they take into consideration, and that actually changes the way they see the world.
I guess, Ryan, the only
Yeah,
caveat to
add
that
in.
is, if your offer is more transactional, if it's something they already see the world in the way that you want them to, and you just got to get the offer in front of them, right? Like, I'm hungry and I need to go buy some food, and I happen to drive by McDonald's right now and it looks good, then I'm just going to buy, right? So it's not about changing the
You
way I
have
see
to at
the
least
world.
change the world, their view of the world, in the sense that they know you exist,
There you go.
right? So it may not be as profound as some businesses. Some businesses have to make profound changes
Yep.
into the way they see the world. Some only have to do superficial. I'm glad you brought that up, because that is a distinction. Some people could overlook this and discount it because they say, well, no, they just need to know I exist. Well, that's seeing the world differently.
Yep.
If McDonald's was hidden in a bunker underground, even though they would fulfill the need, and they don't really need to sell you on the fact that you would fulfill the need, the fact that they're not seen prevents you from actually changing your behavior to include them. So, yeah, that's good. Now, here's the issue I see frequently is people equate sending with engagement. So if I send my message out, then they'll see the world differently, and then they'll buy. But we know that's not true. Sending is not equal to engagement. Now, sending is a prerequisite for engagement. If we don't send, then they can never engage. But just because we hit send doesn't mean they engage. And this is something that a lot of people, they know as soon as you say it. Like, do you have any issue with that statement?
No, it makes total sense. And I'd say it's even more true depending on the medium that you're using.
Oh, interesting. Okay, we'll get into that then, because I think that's a natural flow from this discussion. But I really want to emphasize that for people. A lot of people, marketers especially, when they're building out campaigns, they build it with the idea that the person's going to go through everything that is sent. They're going to take every step. And if you have that assumption, you're already handicapping your ability to be able to actually produce something that would be good for your company. We can never fulfill the ultimate purpose of marketing and sales, to get people to spend money and become customers. And the reason I said not just spend money, I think goes back to the original point you made, Tyler. Become customers. Some people go, well, aren't you saying the same thing? Spend money and become customers. But in my mind, a customer is different than someone who spends money. So
Yeah.
spending money is just merely transactional. Customers actually denotes relationship. And long-term relationship can only be based on trust, which is created by that exchange of value, where both sides say, hey, I'm getting exactly what I expected, or better, right? So there's another underlying point that I want to bring up here, and I'd love to hear your debate on this. But I am a firm believer that all sales happen in conversation. All sales happen in conversation. And the only caveat that people bring up would be like, well, what about people just buy after they see my marketing? And in that scenario, I say the conversation was had with the marketing. So you entered into the dialogue going on in their head, and you had the conversation there sufficient that you were able to have that conversation, help them to buy. But all other sales also need a secondary conversation that goes on. And that's why marketing and sales are distinguished as two different activities, because in reality, without sales, we never have that real conversation that can really cement a relationship with the customer. Any real issues with that? Because I think if there are, I'd like to hear them.
Makes sense to me. Like you already brought up, though, some people in more transactional sales might have a problem with that statement, but
Sure. No,
in reality, it goes back
agreed.
to there's a conversation happening in their head already, and you were able to get your product into that conversation. So
I would, to address that point too, I would say there's probably a correlation, a direct relationship between the value of the customer and the need for a conversation. The higher the value of the customer, the more the need for a conversation.
Absolutely.
And so the business that you probably want to be in is a business where a sales conversation is critical to the whole experience. Mm-hmm. From my perspective, because I'm kind of the ilk that I think, we've got to work. We don't know how long we have on the earth. You might as well work in a business where the value is higher.
Sure.
So that's just me. To increase sales, then, I would state that we must increase engagement and have more conversations. So if we can increase engagement with our message so that we prime the mind for the conversation, then we have more conversations. Ultimately, we'll see an increase in sales, not just the number, but quality of the sales. Do you have any problem with that statement?
Nope, I like it. I'm just going to say, as long as the message is compelling, like you already clarified.
Yeah. So this is building on the foundation of all that other stuff. But I'm glad you put that caveat in there, because if it's not compelling, and we kind of talked about that last week, that compelling argument is really critical. And, I was so excited about that I did another training inside of our user group about that. Okay, what is the most effective way for you to deliver your message for engagement? And sometimes the word engagement probably has a mixed meaning now, because engagement was used in describing a type of ad on Facebook. So a lot of people that have done Facebook marketing, have engagement, and they're thinking likes and comments, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we talk about engagement, what we mean is that they actually are consuming the message sufficiently that it impacts their mind and their heart, that it impacts the person. That's what I mean by engagement. That's why I wanted to highlight that in red, just so we made sure we define that. Would you agree that that's an okay definition for engagement?
Absolutely. Makes sense.
Yeah. So it's not just the fact that they clicked on something or they read a headline or subject line. It's actual engagement with the message is ultimately what we're going for. And that's really difficult to measure. So we usually use auxiliary measurements to try and get an indication on that. But the most effective way for us to deliver our message has to be one that does get closest to actually creating engagement. So I put a little chart together, the common mediums of communication. There are many more, but these are the ones that are easiest to influence or impact with marketing automation. So that's why, since that's the context in which we're having this big discussion, is people that use Infusionsoft, people are using marketing automation, CRM. And so I've limited it to direct mail, phone call, email, and text message. And the first kind of characteristic that I think is important for us to be clear on with each of these is information transmission, because ultimately, if we're trying to change the way someone sees the world, if you're really powerful, you can probably do it in a quote, right? But I'm not that powerful. I need a little bit more to be able to communicate the message in order to change the way someone sees the world. And so this is an important characteristic. Direct mail is visual and fixed, meaning it's a physical medium. You see it with your eyes. It may have words or images, illustrations, and it's fixed content. The content isn't changing. That's the nature of it, obviously. The phone call is audio only, but the information transmission is one of the highest. There's two others that are higher than a phone call, and that is like a video call. If we're video conferencing, we can see each other's faces. And then in person, which is even better, because there's so much information that we pick up that's not auditory in a video or in person, that just makes that information transmission so much higher. And if anyone's been in sales, they know that if you have an in-person meeting, you pick up on so much more than even just an audio. But audio is way higher than some of the other mediums. And it's dynamic in the sense that it's two people going back and forth in a conversation. So we're getting information and cues, and we're able to deal with that. So the information transmission is extremely high, and that gives us the ability to really be able to affect the way someone sees the world if we're good at that medium. Email is very much like direct mail, except for it's not in the physical world. That's probably something, if I were to add that on, that would be kind of a downside of it compared to direct mail. But they're very similar in the sense that you can have images, you can have text, you can get quite a bit of information into an email, just like you can a direct mail piece. But it is fixed for the most part. I mean, there's some dynamic variations. You can have dynamic images where you can merge in a name or something, or a countdown time and stuff like that. But for the most part, fairly fixed. It's not really changing in relationship to you reading it. And then we have the text message, which is probably the weakest in information transmission, which is very fascinating, because it's usually limited to 160 characters. You can go longer than that, but if you go too much longer, its effectiveness really declines because it's not what it's for. And it's text only for the most part, although you can include images, which some of you saw if you registered for this event. Then you got a text message and you were able to get, kind of an image part of it. But for the most part, I would consider it text fixed. So not a whole lot of information transmission going on. And that's probably one of its biggest weaknesses. So of the three, I would say the text message on information transmission can be one of the weakest, interestingly enough. Cost. So I think we could all agree direct mail. Now, and Tyler, just interrupt me if there's anything you want to add in, if you think if I'm being too generous or not generous enough to a particular medium.
Sounds good.
Direct mail has a high cost relative to the other three. And for this, it kind of controls how most people use it. You have to really have a good, solid game plan. So for many people, they don't utilize direct mail because it requires quite a bit of thought and planning to get it right. Phone call. I call this one hidden moderate because a phone call does carry some cost, but usually it's hidden in the sense that it's not really in our face when we're making a phone call or receiving a phone call, how much that may cost us. So we know we're paying for it, but it's not something we generally speaking think about unless you're looking at your phone bill. Same thing with email. Email generally, is perceived as being free, even though that's obviously worked into the cost. I know you worked at Infusionsoft, and from what I understood, a large portion of what occupies many people at Infusionsoft was just keeping email flowing.
Certainly an important aspect of it, yeah.
Yeah, so that's built into the cost. When you pay for Infusionsoft each month, you are paying for its ability to do email, to keep that email being delivered, dealing with issues that could come up with it. But it's hidden. You're not thinking, oh, I'm going to send an email. How much is that going to cost me? Because usually there's a per email cost. So it's very low, and that makes it very attractive in many ways because of the perception of almost no cost. And if there is any, it's hidden as it's baked in and bundled with other things that we're paying for. So we don't even think of it as a direct cost. Like most people, if I ask them, what's the cost of email? They may say nothing.
Right.
Text message is a little more obvious for people because they know they're paying per text for many platforms where we're doing it with marketing automation. But it's a moderate cost. So it's similar to phone call in terms of feel. Not cheap like email is perceived, and certainly not direct mail, but still has some sort of cost. So then we have the interaction rate. If you do something fantastic and have a 20% interaction with your direct mail piece, that's not a response rate. Response rates are what, Tyler? What have you heard as far as response rates for direct mail typically?
I truthfully haven't done enough direct mail to really know.
If you did 2%, you're almost like a god in direct mail.
Yeah.
1% is like, okay, you're about average. Below that happens frequently because people don't know what they're doing with direct mail. It's a very complicated medium to get right. But if you have, when I'm talking about interaction, not just response, so at an interaction rate, I would say it's safe to say that 20% of the people that have something mailed to them at least interact with it in some way. And so that's what we're going to call an interaction rate. So I'm being probably a little bit generous on that, but I feel like that's probably pretty accurate. Phone call, we're talking about outbound phone calls to contacts. A 10% connection rate is fairly typical. Would you see it higher or lower than that? What do you think, Tyler?
Sorry, I had myself muted for a sec.
No
yeah, it depends on the list that you're calling, but even lists of people that have recently requested information, requested a phone call.
Yeah,
You might only do 10 to 15% on that first time around.
Okay.
Trying to
we'll say 15%, even though I wrote 10, just to be generous.
Okay.
Because I feel like let's be generous. And we'll in the fourth training we'll really dissect the phone call because it is a powerful medium. I'm very pro phone call, but it does have certain major challenges, like you're saying, to a warm list of people actually interested in talking to you. 15% is really pretty good, and so we would definitely want to do better than that if we were going to use that medium. Email, 5 to 25%. This is I think this is about average. I think there are people definitely that get higher open rates, which is a troubled metric to begin with. So we're not talking about click-throughs, but would you say 5 to 25%? Let's say 25%.
Yeah, I'd say
average.
I divide those people up into two groups now. It's like those who are actively managing engagement versus those that aren't. If they're not, then yeah, their rates are going to be like 10% or less. If they are, then it's not uncommon still to get 30, 40% open rates. But you
So
got to be
that's,
pretty on
you're
top
putting in
of it.
quite a bit of work then to do that though.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And you have to be honest with yourself about where you are too on that, because if you do the work, obviously you get better results. If you don't do the work, you should expect it, like you're saying, 5 to 10%. So maybe my 25 is low. We'll go ahead and bump it up to 40 to be super generous. And I think that's more on the long tail than it is in the center of a distribution. I would guess that the masses are probably at 10 to 15 if we're going to be super generous.
Yeah, I think most clients that we interact with, like when we first engage with them, they're probably in the 10 to 20% range. I mean, I think
Yeah.
your range here is perfect. Just
Okay.
you can do better, but like you said, you got to put a lot of work into it.
Yeah, and that's why having a partner is really important if email is going to be a central player in your marketing, because without someone really taking an active interest in that, you won't do as well as you can. I always find this metric to be super interesting, because this is not the click-through rate. This is just the engagement rate, interaction rate that we're talking about. I don't want to use engagement, because engagement means they actually consume the message. Just looking at it briefly, skimming it, is what we would consider still an interaction. Looking at the subject line is actually on the border of interaction. With text messages, everybody's seen this percentage. It's all over the place, 97%. I don't know if it's a few points higher or lower. I would give it plus or minus 3, probably 5 if I want to be really generous. But it's pretty dang good as far as interaction rate. Do you have any issues with that? I know you have a long history.
I think 97% is in the range of accurate a couple years ago. I think it's declining.
A little bit.
Yeah, I think as more and more companies are doing text marketing, and probably not using the best
Practices.
strategies to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Then and people just get busier. We got more info coming at us everywhere, email, text, everything, and you just start ignoring.
What do you think is a fair place to put it?
I don't know, 80% plus. Yeah.
Okay. I think it's 85 to 90, but that's just me. But you do raise an important point. Even with fix your funnel users, I see a lot of bad practice, even though I'm trying to teach as much as I can about good practice. And frequently when people give me a chance to do a strategy call with them, we'll make a couple adjustments and suddenly they get way better results because we just tweaked some of the wording. We'll try and cover some of that today, but we'll put it at the 85. Convenience, direct mail. This is on a scale of 10. The direct mail is pretty convenient. I mean, the only reason I wouldn't put it as at 10 for the consumer is just because some people get annoyed with junk mail. But in terms of convenience to interact with the medium, it's pretty high. Phone call, 1. Even though I love the phone call, I mean, Tyler, if somebody calls you and you don't know why they're calling and how long that call is going to be, what's going through your mind?
I immediately decline any call that I'm not expecting or that I don't know the person calling me.
Yeah, and that's not uncommon. I mean, I know you're more aggressive at protecting your time because of the value of it, but even for people that aren't, everybody makes an evaluation, and there's so much uncertainty around the phone call. Again, we'll get into that in the 4th training, but because of that, the convenience level is very low, and that's probably part of why the phone call interaction rate is so low. Email, I would call it 4. And the only reason it's as high as it is just because it is pretty convenient on the phone or on a device in terms of that, but the competition rate inside of the email inbox is ridiculous. So even though texting has become a little bit more popular and maybe there's a little bit more, it's not even in the ballpark. It'd be like in the dugout still compared to email. The competition rate is just so tremendous that a lot of people I know personally just have a hard time keeping up with it. How many unread emails do you have? I know you have a special approach, but how many unread emails do you have, Tyler?
I wouldn't say it's a special approach, but in my inbox right now, I'm just opening it up real quick. I have 24 emails in my inbox. I have about maybe 14 of them marked as unread, but they're marked unread as purpose because that means I need to go back to them.
Okay. So Tyler is very organized in this. I know because I've been following Tyler for a little bit. I know Tyler has, shared that he's got his inbox to 0, which is something a lot of people never accomplish. But you have a methodology to try and stay on top of it because it's so critical for just operations in your business. but many people don't. I gave this training to another group a while ago, and the co-host he had, I think he said 16,000 unread emails in his inbox. My wife is much better. She's only at 6,400.
I've been up to 3 or 4,000 in the past.
Yeah.
But yeah, it gets out of
I
control.
use things like Unroll Me and,
Yeah.
you know, periodically, if it gets too big, I'll just archive all, you know, just to try and stay above water. But
Right.
there's so much competition in the email inbox that it makes it very difficult, and that's why it's a 4. Text message convenience factor, I put it at 10 simply because people are well trained at managing text messages, and there's no expectation that they have to reply. They can, no expectation. You know, you can get to it if you are engaged in a conversation with somebody, and then you've got to go do something else. It's not like the worst thing in the world to delay that for an hour or two to get back to them. So I ranked it pretty high. Again, I'm probably a little biased, so you guys can take that everything I say with a grain of salt on that. Competition, I already kind of went through this. Direct mail is very low because of the cost, right? Phone call is really high. There are a lot of phone calls being made. We all know that because we receive them. Competition on email is very high. I think text message is still pretty low, but that may be just a personal experience. I don't get a ton of business text messages, even though I try and engage with as many text opportunities as I can because I'm always curious to learn. You're seeing an increase in it in your world, Tyler, right?
Yeah, I'm not a ton. I'm not getting bombarded in text like I am email, but
Yeah,
it's enough on top of just friends and family and everybody else texting that it starts to get overwhelming. You're like, yeah, if I don't open that text, no big deal.
yeah. And like we said, it's probably still in the dugout compared to email. It's
Yeah.
not even on the field, but it is a changing environment. Okay, automatable, right? Direct mail, extremely automatable. There's probably 30 different services that can send direct mail for you with marketing automation, and they all have different strengths and weaknesses. So just about anything that you want to automate with direct mail can be done and fully customized too. Not like it was 10 years ago. Bet great rates. I mean, if you're thinking about direct mail, it's definitely something you can throw into a campaign today. We've been doing direct mails for 12 years now with Infusionsoft. So, meaning either something we did or somebody else did, we've been using it. Phone call, you can't. You just can't. You can automate a voicemail drop, which we offer at Fix Your Funnel, and that has some value. I know a lot of people are having some great success with it, but you can't actually automate the human to human phone call. Humans got to be involved in that. Email, absolutely, of course. I mean, forever, right? And then
Ryan, didn't you share something maybe a year ago about like artificial intelligence voice calls? Um,
yeah, okay.
like-
It is possible with through Google, but Google hasn't released that to anybody.
okay, got it.
So that it is really neat. Some people find it very creepy, but they made it so a computer. What they were doing essentially is creating a human API, right?
Right.
Making it so that a computer could interact with a human through voice and get stuff. But that's nothing that's available to us, unfortunately, at this time. If it ever was, it would be really fun. You could do some great stuff, but you probably end up upsetting people too, just like people do with chatbots when they get too crazy with them.
Yep.
And of course, text messages are automatable, and we'll get into that today. So, superpower for a direct mail physical presence. I mean, it's really hard to beat being in someone's physical realm. The problem I have with the phone call, email, and text message, really, if there's any weakness to them, is they're ethereal, right? They're in the ether, they're in the electrons, they're not something that has a physical presence. The physical presence just does command so much attention, which is part of what we need to get people to engage. So I really have to admire direct mail for its physical presence superpower. Phone call, information transmission, hands down. Nothing gets close to it in our little chart here of things that are common mediums of communication. For email, I would say its biggest strength is this perceived cost. Do you have any issue with that one, Tyler?
No, that makes sense to me.
I mean, people just send them like crazy because it doesn't seem to cost anything. There is a cost, but we won't get into it right now.
Yep.
And then there's the text message, and I think it's the interaction rate and convenience factor mixed together. Just make it a really powerful medium for some things. So that's mine. This is kind of my checklist of the big wins on each of these rows. But what is the goal? I mean, we talked about all these mediums, but we have to remember the goal. The whole purpose to talking about any of them is our goal in marketing and sales is to communicate a compelling message sufficient that we change the way someone sees the world so they want to do business with us. So what do we use in marketing automation? So how do you incorporate these in the most effective mediums for engagement in your existing campaigns? And I'm telling you, from my perspective, this is why Fix Your Funnel does what it does. So I didn't stumble into texting and then said, oh, okay, I'm going to create a business around it. In fact, Tyler knows my story better than maybe a lot of people because he's been around longer, at least around me longer. We did it because it was a powerful medium. We started using Tyler's short code texting integration way back in the day because we needed to deliver a message we needed to be seen and engaged with. And so we used it, and then as things progressed and Tyler had to let that go, and we saw the void. That's what we filled it because we knew it was an effective medium. So texting to me is the most effective medium for engagement. And not because it can deliver a whole bunch of content, but because it can initiate that engagement more powerfully than any other medium for the price that I am aware of. So we're going to talk about how do we incorporate that into campaigns. And there's two ways, there's two categories. There's delivering the message, and there's another one I'll get to in just a moment. But when we talk about delivering the message, we're like, how do we get that message for them to engage with in the first place? And you'll remember that our whole thing is we want to deliver the message so it's engaged with effectively, and then we want to start conversation. So you can kind of guess what the second category is. The first category is deliver the message. So the first type is the content delivery campaign message. So you send a message like this. Here's the link to the video you requested on how to improve sales with text. And then you got the link to the video. The reason that this is so powerful is because if I send out 100 emails and I'm really good at it, 40% of those emails are going to be seen. And then some portion of that 40% is going to click through depending on how compelling my message is. Right? So let's say on the short side, if I send this text out, it's going to be twice as seen as the email and in less time. So if my message is compelling, what's the likelihood I get twice as many people going to the content with the text versus the email? The answer is pretty good. So this is one that you definitely want to have in your tool belt. You want to be looking at your existing campaigns and say, where's it critical that somebody gets some information that I'm trying to send to them to change the way they see the world? And basically what you're doing is you're combining a headline and a link. And a lot of people go, oh shoot, headline and link. Wouldn't I need more text than that in order to convey something? And the truth is, this is actually a perfect formula because people don't expect long text. In fact, they don't want long text. And so all you have to do is get a compelling reason for them to tap that link, and then you let the page that they land on do the rest of the work.
Hey, so Ryan, I've got a question.
Yeah.
For this series, you had an opt-in for the series, and it was text only. As you know, I had a few people that were like, hey, can I sign up by email or whatever? I'm curious, have you ever run a test where you allow people to choose, hey, I want to sign up by email or I want to sign up by text? And if so, what did the data show? I'm just curious what the preference would be.
I have not run that test personally. I know we have customers that run some tests like that. I'm kind of a hardliner, as you know.
Obviously.
Once I'm convinced about the value of going a particular direction, I just don't sacrifice anything on it. And what I've discovered is that I call it marketing rule number 19, which is you have to know how you're going to sell before you decide how to lead capture. And so once I know the methodology by which we need to sell effectively, then I don't compromise lead capture on anything. And I know quite a few of our customers that use web forms where they click name, email, and phone number required, and they do that versus the keyword. And I think that's perfectly fine. I'm not going to tell anybody, no, you have to use the keyword. There are certain benefits that come from it, which we talked about last week. but I think it may have been after you had to bounce. But I'm not going to tell a company that has been doing web forms, drop that and didn't do the keyword. I've seen some people do a hybrid where they have the keyword option and they have the form with the phone number, email, and name. But ultimately, whatever decision you choose on, if you get your message in the right place where it's actually compelling, it doesn't really matter too much on mechanism, is what I found. The people that really are interested will get through. The people that aren't won't. I don't know if that answers your question well enough, because I didn't give you any data.
Yeah, no, I'd just be really curious. Like if you gave people the option, I like the simplicity of, just email or just phone number. And obviously there's benefits to using text. I like it. But some people just don't want to give out their cell phone number. They're protective of it, or they don't have one for some odd reason. And so if you give them the option, I just wonder what would happen. Maybe we'll run that
Yeah.
test soon.
If you do decide to go the route of giving people options, you still should make the phone number required, simply because of marketing rule number 19. Now, the only exceptions to this are people that are selling small price point products with no particular long-term customer value. And in that case, I don't think I'm really fit for them anyway. You know what I mean? In terms
Yep.
of what we're talking about, because we're talking about sales, and you're just not out there, promoting and selling hamburgers. You got to be doing something a little bit more substantial, a business that has some recurring back end, or has a higher product value, higher customer value, in order for you to really be thinking about sales. But so, to the ultimate point, to answer that question all the way, if you were right now using a web form and that's been working well for you, but you need to get more out of it, add the phone number on there, make sure your copy is compelling, and give them some reason why you need the phone number. And I found that can get you over the hump that way. If and that's really the thing. It's kind of a case by case basis, but for sure you're going to need to get the cell phone number, because that opens all the doors. And I'll hopefully show you enough to help you see that that's something you've got to do. Here's another one. It's called the email reference campaign message. They sent you an email yesterday about some trainings I'm putting on to help you use Fix Your Funnel more effectively. Will you let me know if you got it? And then I put my name on there simply for recognition. This message may look familiar to a number of people, because after I gave email a chance in our campaign to invite them to these trainings, I used a text message, and it was this text message. And it was very effective. We had a ton of engagement with people. Worked really well to help people to recognize that email in their email inbox. And so the email reference campaign message or broadcast was really effective, because what it does is it gets people to engage with that email, which sends a good signal to the email service providers that, oh, this sender actually is one that this person wants to have interaction with. So I'm a huge fan of pointing people back to email, even though you may have heard all this discussion up this point and thought, oh, Ryan's just into texting. I really feel like you got to have multiple medias, and email is a baseline. It has relatively low cost, maybe not great on the attention, but good enough. There's huge businesses that run just off of email, so there's nothing wrong with it per se, but we can use text to actually enhance the effectiveness of email. So in my email, where I'm telling them a little bit more of the story, I've got more room to communicate a message, I can use text to point them back there. And this, I highlighted in red this question here, because this question is called a conversation starter. Even though it's not the ideal conversation starter, it is one that elicits engagement from the prospect. And that opens up all sorts of doors for opportunities to help that client in some way, or that prospect in some way, to get closer to making buying decisions, becoming a longer term customer, having a deeper relationship with them. So whenever possible, I'd like to work in a question that elicits engagement into my text messages, because texting is inherently a two-way medium. It is not a speak at medium the way that email is frequently used. It is an interactive medium that's designed for two people to interact. Okay. So these are the two deliver the message ones. And I like to couple them together as well. So if I do the content delivery, And I take a strategy of cost in the sense that because I know that there's a percentage of people that are engaged with email, I usually, if it's not a time is of the essence situation, I'll usually let email go first because it's relatively low cost. If somebody interacts with the email, then there's no sense in me texting them. Does that make sense, Tyler?
Absolutely.
So I'll let email, carry the water as far as it will. And with all those people that don't engage in a trackable way with the email, I will now use the text message to get the rest of them, because they're probably like me. They're in their email box infrequently, a little overwhelmed by the whole situation, and probably don't keep on it great, but they're still interested in the information because of the actions that they already took. And so when I send this text message, boom, now I've captured their attention, and I've enhanced the ability of everything in my marketing because of it. So these messages are definitely ones you want to work in. But again, do the text if you can. Sometimes time is of the essence and we want to use the right tool in the right place. And so we'll do the text first, but frequently I will use the text secondary so that I can give email every opportunity to do its job. So it's not usually like the next hour, it's maybe the next day or 2 days after I've given email a chance to really do its work.
Hey, Ryan.
Yeah.
I think I know how you'll respond to this, but it might be helpful for the audience. I'm curious how you handle permission and expectation in that situation where you're using text message as a secondary medium. On the front end, did you ask for permission to send them occasional texts? How did you capture their phone number? What was the reasoning? How do you set expectations around communication? How often you're going to text them and things like that?
Yeah, those are great questions. We'll address those in 2 slides. Is that fair?
Great.
Yeah. And I love the fact that question is coming up, because that means you're thinking, well, how can I use this and not tick people off?
Yeah.
Because you want to make sure that you have permission and you're interacting with them appropriately. Okay, so, but look through your campaigns. Like, this is something you want to do today. You want to go open up your campaigns that you use most often. You will look at them and say, where could I layer in texting to make this whole campaign more effective? Is there a key email that I know if someone interacts, because you guys hopefully have some sort of data. That's one of the great powers of Infusionsoft, is the data it holds. Hopefully you have some data on how many people buy that interact with this particular email. Well, maybe I want to point people back to that email that don't get it, because if they do, I know they're more likely to buy. And if I send that text that references that email, now, if I had I don't send out very many emails, so it's pretty easy to find an email I sent to people. But if you're sending out quite a few, you might reference the subject line or some keyword that'll help them find it in their inbox. That's why I didn't do it here, but you might want to do that if you're sending a bunch of email or frequently emailing. On the content delivery campaign message, this is where, if they would just watch this video, it answers so many questions that would help them see the world differently so they could be better prepared to make a buying decision. Then I'm going to want to do a content delivery message for them. Okay. The other 2 types of message, or the other 2 fall into this category of conversation starters. Now, you notice I worked a conversation starter into the content delivery, and that's totally acceptable. You can always do that. And I like to do that because we don't know when the person's ready to engage in a sales conversation. But as soon as they start engaging with you, what they're telling you is, hey, I'm interested in learning more, or I have questions, or I have concerns, or I'm interested in having this conversation in some way. And so we're letting them kind of initiate that interaction. So there is one that's called a content reference conversation starter. So you notice that I sent the text message in my campaign that had a link to the video talking about engagement or whatever. And so I said, I sent you a video on how to increase sales with texting yesterday. Which of the 4 message types do you need to use first? Okay. So that's inviting a conversation to occur. You'll notice I'm not saying, are you ready to buy? Are you ready to sign up? Because the mature salesperson doesn't start with the close. They start with an invitation to help solve the problem of the consumer, right? Of the prospect. What is it that they need? And that's what they start with. And so that's what the design of these questions are. Preferably not yes, no questions that are open-ended in nature, meaning they can answer correctly in any way that they respond. And hopefully messages related to the topic of which we know that they're interested and engaged with, based on the fact that they got into our database in the first place. The second type is called promise kept confirmation starter or conversation starter. So if anybody asks for something and then you send it to them, that's a great opportunity to send them the confirmation that the promise you made was kept, and then start a conversation. So this one is, I just emailed you the link to the book. So this is maybe someone where they filled out a form requesting a book from you, or an ebook, or maybe they texted a keyword to get a copy of a book. In my case, I share a PDF and an audio copy of my book, The Messaging Conversation, and or The Messaging Connection. Sorry, conversation on the mind. And so once that email's been sent, I know it's sent by the automation, so I can go ahead and trigger a text message to go and say, hey, I just emailed you that link to the book, because sometimes there's a delay between when people request and when that machine actually sends it. So we just put these right next to each other in the sending inside of Infusionsoft. And then that's how they know, okay, now it's in my inbox. And I'm sure you've all had the experience where you've opted in for something and some delay occurs and you're looking in your inbox, it's not showing up, and then life happens and you go on to something else that needs to be done, and then you forget to come back, and then it gets pushed below the fold with all the other new emails that came in, and then you lose it entirely. You never get to it. So that's another power of this one, is not only is it calling their attention to go look in the email inbox, but now I'm also getting a chance to ask the question, by the way, what caused you to request the book today? Okay, what caused you to request the book today? It's a great question, because they can answer it in any way they want, and whatever they say will be correct. So these two conversation starter examples, the content reference and then the promise kept, are two of my favorite for conversation starting. And you'll notice I start a conversation with the email reference as well. But these are definitely messages you want to be thinking about putting into your campaigns that you already have that are email only right now, to enhance their capacity to start conversations. Now, Tyler, I talked to a lot of people, and sometimes people are like, well, why would I want to have sales conversations? I just want people to buy. You have anybody that you've ever talked to that's hesitant to elicit conversation with prospects?
Yeah, happens all the time because they get sold on the automated dream, right? I typically call it the Infusionsoft dream, but let's call it the automated dream, right? They're like, yeah, you know, I got this Infusionsoft thing and I thought I would just be able to automate campaigns and just go, you know, hang out on the beach and the money just comes flowing in. And they don't realize that, yeah, it doesn't work that way. Like you said, depends on, you know, the type of sale and whatnot, and if it's transactional or not. But, you know, any sale that has any decent amount of value is going to require a conversation. You got to get on the phone.
And so these text messages segue into phone calls, by the way. That's the whole point of them in many cases, because of the low information transmission of texting. It really is a segue medium to the phone. So it's like, hey, this is great. How about we jump onto a phone call, or how about we jump onto a Zoom meeting, or, you know, whatever, and we'll finish the conversation there. That's what typically happens for people. But this medium here opens the door to that conversation, because it allows people to become comfortable with who you are as a company or an individual, and to know what's possible interacting with you. And then based off of that, go to the next level of relationship, which is engaging in a voice conversation of some sort. So this is what Tyler was getting at with his question earlier, which is, how do I open the door to texting? Because texting is a very intimate form of communication. I mean, that device that we get those text messages on usually is within 3 feet of us 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for most people. And because of that, texting, because it is seen at a higher rate, there are fewer filters on it. It's a very intimate medium. So we need to make sure that we're getting permission to interact with people. Now, there's multiple ways to do that. If you're doing any kind of web form, you must have an unchecked checkbox that says, ask in some way for permission for you to be texting with them. And, you know, if you want to do it extremely on like the rigid side, you would even say how frequently you're going to text them. I like to keep it a little less formal. I can still meet the requirements of, because there's two requirements in life. There's legal requirements, and then there's psychological requirements. And psychological requirements always expand further than legal requirements, always. Because, and the reason being is, nobody complains about something unless psychologically they feel violated. So if we get the psychological right, we'll be fine in terms of legal. And the psychological part means we need to get their permission to be interacting with them via text. So that's the downside of the web form, is we have to get that explicit yes, it's okay for you to be interacting with me via text. And then we need to be respectful in our usage of it. Okay. So just because you can doesn't mean that you should then send them a text every day, right? Just because you open the door, because as soon as you opened it, you're gonna lose that permission. And this comes to a concept I call attention currency, which is that every interaction that you have with a prospect, with a contact, is either making a subtraction in the amount of attention that they give to you and your messages, or a deposit. So it's either withdrawal or deposit, every interaction. So we send them a text message that doesn't create value from their perception, we just made a withdrawal from the attention they're going to give us. If we make enough withdrawals, it goes beyond them just not giving us attention. They become annoyed. So this is why I said email just is perceived as being free, because when you send a ton of emails and you're not adding any value to their life from their perspective, you are now perceived as a pest instead of a welcome guest. And so in order for us to keep welcome guest status, what we have to do is we have to make sure that we have permission in the first place, and then we give value from their perspective in the second place. And engaging in a question of what is on their mind, what are their needs, is always going to be welcome. Almost always is going to be welcome. So first get permission, and then second, make sure that you're paying attention to the attention currency account that you're holding with people. I think a question came in.
Yeah, Devin's just wondering, he's asking if you see way less people checking the box where you ask for permission to text.
Okay, so the answer to that is no, but that's also dependent upon, what would you guys guess, Tyler? What would you think?
The offer.
The offer, yes. If your offer is terrible, way less. If your offer is compelling, way more. So when Trent and I were running this little experiment of a side business where we were able to generate 120,000 leads through Facebook lead ads, we found that 78 to 80% of those 120,000 said yes, and they had to choose from a drop down, not just check a checkbox. They had to choose yes or no from a drop down, and they chose yes 78 to 80% of the time, to let us send them a text message with a link to the video, and to interact with them via text message. So that just gives you an idea.
It doesn't surprise me at all. When the offer is good, you should get the majority of people. We're running our SuccessCon virtual summit right now, and when people opt in, we gave them a checkbox. Check this if you want to get SMS reminders about the videos that are available each day. We're getting about 50%, which could be a lot better if we.
Sure. I mean, it's not a terrible offer, but it's a little weak, right?
Yeah, it's a little weak. It's just like, hey, you're already getting this anyways. If you just want SMS reminders about what's happening each day.
So that's what we call a convenience offer.
Yeah.
Right? So convenience is a large factor. I mean, 50% shows you how large that is.
Yeah, it actually surprises me. Every time we do this, it surprises me how many people choose it.
Yeah, and that's on the convenience factor. Now, if we work in an actual compelling reason why they would need to interact via text or get things via text, and you'd be surprised. You know what our compelling reason for saying yes on that experiment was? Speed.
Yeah.
It wasn't to be reminded. It was speed to get the thing that they wanted. And everybody perceives texting as being faster than email. Even though, technically you should say email should be faster. People perceive texting as faster. They know it's not going to get lost in the inbox. It's just perceived as that. So the offer to get 80% was simply speed. Can we immediately, we use the word immediately, can we immediately text you the link to this video? And so that opened up the door for the whole interaction. Okay. So automated conversations are my preferred method. And we already talked a little bit about this, but this is the best way to open it. And the reason why is, as you look at this conversation right here, there are three things going on here. We have 3 steps of interaction. And if the person gets through all 3 steps of interaction, what we've done is we've unlocked psychologically the opportunity for them to interact. And if they take the final question, you guys see the question at the very bottom of that? By the way, why did you text demo to our number today? Not the strongest conversation starter question, but an easy one to use. If somebody takes that next step, they tell us so much about where they are in terms of wanting to interact with our company. Does that make sense? So this is why it's my preferred method, because once you understand marketing and sales truly, what you understand is it is more about quality. You have to have some quantity, right? You can't have one really good one. That's enough. You do have to have some quantity, but the quality is much more important in terms of impact on the bottom line, because every lead you get that you have to follow up with has some sort of cost involved in it, even if it's just the cost of the machine running. So the automated conversations, I want to teach you how to do an effective one, because if you do an effective one, it can be a huge game changer. We have clients that are pulling in hundreds of leads a day off of keyword conversations. And I really got to look into how some of those are doing it. But they're making that offer somewhere for people to text the keyword in. I'm not sure if it's online, or if it's in a podcast, or it's direct mail, or what. That's what I'd like to investigate, because all those are effective. I've seen all of those work really well. But you have a keyword. The funny part about the keyword is the second that someone texts in this keyword demo, it tells me so much about them, right? And that's the downside for me teaching this, is once you find out what I teach you, then you realize, okay, I'm making a pretty big commitment here in some ways. When you text in the keyword demo, I know total context about what you are interested in, because that keyword is associated with a particular meaning, So I know, where do we present this? What is the offer? I know all of that. So as soon as the person texts in keyword demo, a few things happen. I have full context about what they're after and what they're interested in. I also have their cell phone number. And with their cell phone number, I now have the capacity, because they texted me first, to text them back. I have the capacity to make a phone call, which they probably won't answer if we don't have trust yet. And if my offer isn't great, but I have the ability to make a phone call. And I also have the ability to remarket them on Instagram and Facebook. And that's all just with them texting in the keyword demo, or whatever keyword you use. I'm creating or updating a contact record, and I'm applying a tag to them. So that way I have all the automation powers to do all those things we just talked about right there inside of Infusionsoft. Through a conversation, typically I go 3 steps. I don't go more than 3 steps, because I found that more than 3 steps starts to get a little bit annoying for people. But 3 steps is totally acceptable. And in those 3 steps, there's 2 primary pieces of contact information, and I collect it in this order. The name, I just ask for name. I don't ask for first or last, or first and last. I just ask for their name. The way that Fix Your Funnel works, it doesn't matter if they reply with first and last or just first. We'll sort that all out. But we ask for the first name, or for the name, and then the email address, because the email is still a baseline communication tool. So I'm always asking for that. And that rounds out my contact record. If I at least have the phone number, the name, the email, and I have this tag, I'm tickled pink, because I've got a lot to work with at that point. Would you agree with that, Tyler? If you have those 4 pieces,
Absolutely.
You're pretty tickled at that point.
Yeah, you're stoked. You got everything you need.
Okay, and then tags get applied throughout the conversation. We use those for marketing automation. That tag that happens after the email is really critical, so I'll use that to trigger sending of an email. I'll at least usually have at least those 2 tags, the tag that comes right after they text into me, and then the tag after they give me their email, because usually those are 2 places where I'm either wanting to track, who's coming in the front door, and then to be able to send automation and have an idea of, who got that automation. The first text message in an automated conversation should always be text only. And the reason why is there's 2 types of text messages for the United States and Canada when it comes to automation. If we're in the UK or Australia or some of the other countries in the European Union, we only get plain text. But in the United States and Canada, we get multimedia text messages, which means we can attach a V card or an image, audio, limited video. So we can attach all these different medias to it. When we attach media, the text message doesn't go through the normal route that a plain text message goes through. A plain text message goes through a very old but very fast network. if we attach any media to it, it now gets directed to a second set of rails, and that is the data network. And that data network is slower than the text-only network. So when we use a keyword conversation, the first text message should be text only, so it goes to that very fast text-only network line. And when that happens, we give people a very quick response that allows them to know they did the right thing. And when people are doing any of this kind of marketing response stuff, what they're looking for is feedback that they did the right thing. So always make sure that that first message is text only. And in this message, if you look at it, I do a couple of things. I always like to thank people for taking action, because I believe you should reinforce good behavior. And so I like to give positive reinforcement. So I always say thank you. And then I'll, with my 160 characters, which I'm limited to on a text, I'm going to try and make sure I get into that conversation, maybe some sort of reference point, so they know that they got the right thing when they get that text back. And then I give them some instructions, and then normally I'll try and work in a small promise, because each step I'm looking as being just this little micro commitment. So I'm asking for something, little promise, asking for something, little promise. And that's kind of the formula I'm always thinking about as I'm writing an automated conversation. If I'm going to do media in the next message, I try and set expectations, because I know that if you send data, a text message to the data network, it can take anywhere from 5 seconds on the quick side to, I've seen as slow as a minute. So if you're going to do data on your next one, which I did in this scenario here, I'm going to give them just a little bit of the next one might take a little bit. So I say this might take a few seconds. Right here, I've attached a contact card. I love attaching a contact card. I wouldn't necessarily recommend you do it in the first interaction. In my case here, because this is a demo conversation we've used for years at Fix Your Funnel, I'm just trying to document and demonstrate, what's possible. And so I attach the contact card here. But you don't necessarily want to do that in yours. But that's why I'm pointing it out here, just the fact that it's possible for you. I would normally do, if I can keep it under 160 characters, plain text here, unless I want to really make an impression, and then I would attach the medium. The other thing that's cool about these automated conversations, and is important, is I can merge in information that I just got. So I just got the name in the previous step, and I'm immediately merging it into the next message. And that kind of gives it more of a personal feel. Even though people perceive that this is a bot, some people are so impressed by the way that the conversation goes if you keep it personal, that they won't even recognize that you're actually having a machine do it. But I like to have that personal measure, just because it ties them in a little bit closer. Now, I made a mistake here. I wanted to point it out, because I think it's good for you guys to learn from mistakes that are made by other people. That's what they call wise or wisdom, right? Learning from other people's mistakes. You'll see that this has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines in it. That's what I call word wall. People will not comprehend as well or as quickly text when it's in a word wall format. And you may say, well, that's a short paragraph, Ryan. But when it comes to text messages, people aren't looking for long paragraphs. So if you want to make it easier for them to digest your information, try to keep it shorter than 3.5. 3.5 lines max. And so it's not right as far as your English teacher is concerned, because you're making a paragraph out of almost every sentence in that case. But it is much easier to digest. And when it comes to engagement, that's all we care about, is that they digest the message. So avoid word walls like that one. You see in that bottom one, I didn't make the same mistake. I broke it up into 3 lines, and that's a great look. If you look at the 2, you can maybe even notice how much easier it is to read the second one as opposed to the first one.
Ryan, I figure everything my grammar teacher taught me in school is actually wrong in marketing. So
it seems to work out that way.
Yeah.
It seems to work out that way. You want to use simple words, simple concepts, break up those lines, just everything you can to make it easier for people to digest information, because we want it to be an enjoyable experience. Okay, this thing at the bottom here is what we call a trackable link. You've used these hopefully in Infusionsoft. It was one of the great discoveries for me when I learned that we could track if somebody clicked a link in the email. Loved it. And so we brought that to texting first. When you tap on this link in the text message, it will apply a tag to the contact record. And in this case, this one goes and connects to what we call a mobile survey, which we talked about last week, right? So I kind of broke a rule here, Tyler. I don't know if you noticed it, but I did 2 call to actions in one message. Do you
I
see
was
the
wondering
2?
about that. You get your link and you get your question.
Yeah. And this was a bit of this was an experiment. Like I said, normally I'm not huge on running experiments, but in this case, I do. And then once I know the results, I just keep with it. But in this one, I knew the rule is only 1 call to action. That's been ingrained in me pretty deeply. But I thought, I'm curious to see what happens. And so I put both in here, and I was very pleasantly surprised. We get about 87% of the people clicking through to the mobile survey, and probably about 67 to 70% that actually respond to the question. So I'm okay with that, because usually the 67% or so is wrapped up in the percentage that click through to the survey. And so that it's actually pretty good for us. Now, if they start the conversation, that tells me so much more about them. So if I had to choose between the 2, depending on the application, again, it depends on what the goal is. If I'm doing the webinar registration confirmation, and I'm only going to pick one to keep it down to 1 call to action, I'm going to go with the link to the assessment because of the power of the assessment. If I'm trying to generate a lead, in this kind of scenario, I'm not going for an appointment. I'm just trying to generate a lead, and my sales cycle is sufficient that I know I can engage in conversation and go straight into the sale. Then I'll do the conversation starting question at the end of the automated conversation. But at the very minimum, you want to have one or the other. There should never be an automated conversation that doesn't have at least one or the other, or both. So that's the only rule that's sacred, is you must have either a link to a trackable or to a survey, or a conversation starter question. And it really just depends on the application in terms of where you're taking them next. If the sales cycle is a little bit longer, if they have to engage with a little bit more information before they're going to be ready to make a buying decision, go with the mobile survey. If you can compress the sales cycle by engaging them in conversation and have the sales conversation, actually, because they're more prepared, they already kind of know a little bit that they want to buy something, they're just not sure what or with who. Then I'm going to go right to the question to start the conversation. And my experience has been that you got to have at least one or the other, if not both. Both is probably more of the extreme, but at least one or the other in any automated conversation. And again, 3 steps, don't go more than that, because then you start getting silly. This is called I'm in love with the technology instead of I'm in love with the outcome. So don't do that. Make sure you keep it at 3. If you don't need the name for some reason, or you don't need the email for some reason, that's fine. Cut a step out, but don't go 3 because you don't need that thing. As few steps as you need to accomplish the job is my motto here. And text does carry a small perceived cost, so that probably can help you to make sure you don't go crazy on it too. Okay. But again, in my mind, the most important part for most situations is probably going to be starting the conversation. The exception is when we're taking them into a webinar, longer sales cycle. Okay. So to increase sales, we must effectively deliver our message and have more conversations. That's the whole point of this training today. I hope you guys got that out of it. I don't know if there's any questions that came up for you, Tyler, or for others. But if you understand these 2 concepts, that we have to deliver the message, it's got to be compelling, it's got to change the way they see the world, and we have to start conversations. Now you're equipped to dramatically decrease sales cycles, which, if you know anything about sales cycles and their impact on your capital invested in the business, the shorter the sales cycle, the quicker the inventory turn. The inventory in sales is the cost of the lead. So if we can take the cost of that lead and flip it into a new customer in a shorter period of time, it takes less capital overall to grow that business quicker. So that's what we're trying to accomplish essentially with this whole concept. Is we're trying to deliver our message more effectively so that people actually engage with it, not just we sent it, but they actually engage with it. And then we try and elicit more conversations so that we can get people into that place where they're getting the answers to their questions, getting their concerns resolved, and they're able to make a buying decision. So that's it. That's what we had planned for today. Unlike a sales presentation, right? I do not have a call to action for you other than use this stuff. If you do, you're going to see great results. That's just the bottom line that we've observed. Okay, we have a few chats in here. Okay. You see way less people checking that box. I couldn't imagine getting above 50% voluntary checking. They want to text the offer. Yeah. Okay, so you guys got it. Any other questions come up for you guys that we can answer? Tyler, do you have any questions that came up for you as we went through this? Because again, you represent the people.
Yeah, I do have a couple questions. This has been awesome training, by the way. So I'm curious, have you used text message to re-engage people who become unengaged and marketable in Infusionsoft? And or what about if they opt out of email marketing? Are you using text messages to get them opted back in?
Yeah, and the answer is yes to both of those. Now, however, you have to know why did they opt out in the first place. Sometimes it's just mechanical, right? They're not engaging with your emails, maybe because they're overwhelmed. They're not seeing all that kind of stuff. We just got to make sure it's not an interest thing. So the way that we make sure it's not an interest thing is we really make sure that our re-engagement is surrounded around value. So it's not just, hey, I noticed you're not getting my emails out back in, right? Which I know you're not implying, but I want to make sure that's crystal clear for people that are listening or watching. You've got to have a compelling offer that goes along with that. If you do have a compelling offer, it works like gangbusters because, again, it's seen. You're bringing value to them. You're reinvigorating their interest in whatever it is that you bring to the market.
And maybe I'm doing it wrong because my text message says, hey, I noticed you're an idiot. You opted out of our emails.
We might classify that as less effective.
Totally right. Kidding, of course. Yeah, no, that was just a question I had about how you're leveraging text to re-engage or get people back on your list and things like that. What about delivering product? Essentially, someone makes a purchase, and instead of sending the confirmation email with like, "Hey, here's access," sending a text to give them access.
Yeah, that's actually what we do at Fix Your Funnel. You cannot sign up unless you have a mobile phone number that you give us during the sign up process. And that's for a number of different reasons. One of them is it does help us filter out scammers, which, is part of what we have to do. But the other part is I know that they're going to get the login. We saw a dramatic decrease in people that weren't getting started when we introduced the texting of their login to them. So that's a really effective methodology, and it's a great reason to be asking for it. So, having a good reason to ask for something is important too. The offer is compelling. That's going to be the biggest part. But why is it that you need my cell phone number? That's a question you have to answer as a marketer, right? And so now if you ask someone to text in, we're avoiding that question altogether because they're not thinking about typing in their phone number. They're thinking about, do I want to text in? And so now we've eliminated that off the table. Now the only consideration is, do I want what they're offering? So that's kind of why I lean towards that, if that makes any sense, because I just avoid that question altogether. However, if you have to do web forms and you're collecting other information there that makes sense to collect there, and you're saying, okay, no, I'd rather do that. Now you have to answer that question. Why is it that you need the cell phone? Now, from a business operations standpoint, Devin, you asked the question, if you're going to sell over the phone or text, should you require mobile phone number at opt-in? And my answer is yes. Otherwise, what's the point to the question or, to the opt-in? If the point of getting leads is to sell, why would we get leads that we cannot sell? And so what we find is when people finally get converted over to this way of thinking and they put it into practice, they see more sales, they see more effectiveness, because now they've stopped worrying about the wrong thing. Because nobody gets paid for the number of leads they have, except for people that sell leads. That's it. Everybody else gets paid on the sales that they create. And you only create sales if you can actually complete the sales process. And the most effective way to sell is you must deliver the message and engage in conversation. Those are the two key factors in sales, is deliver the message, engage in conversation. So this is a hybrid of marketing and sales instead of marketing sales being siloed. In typical organizations, Marketing's job is to generate the lead. So they do whatever they can to generate the lead, because as far as they're concerned, the sale is complete when they get the lead. Sales then has to take these leads and convert them into orders. And so they're not done until they convert them to orders. And so if you have sales and marketing as separate divisions or different people in the organization, one conversation you hear all the time is from sales telling marketing their leads suck. And that's because there's a disconnect between the two, that they're not in sync, they're not harmonized, they're not working together. But for you to create a business that's effective, what you have to do is you have to marry the two. They have to be intertwined. And when we're doing that, now we're saying, okay, what is it that you need, sales, in order to be effective? And as marketing, we're giving them that. We're not making compromises because we're not willing to do some work on making our offer more compelling or articulating it better to the marketplace.
Ryan, you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
So we implement often for clients of ours and for ourselves a process or strategy we call progressive lead capture. So this is something, kind of picked up from the info marketing days of, you have lead magnet and you ask like name and email. And then on the thank you page, it's like, hey, you just requested our ebook. We'll send you a printed copy and a CD, if you give us your mailing address, right? That's everything. And you get more and more information.
Effective.
Yeah, you get more and more information each step of the way. I'm curious, again, I think I know how you're gonna respond to this, but would it make sense to do email opt-in first and then ask for text message to deliver additional value, or to ask for phone number to deliver additional value via text? Or would you rather just go for the cell phone number up front? See, my question is,
I have actually no issue with the two-step opt-in process. You just have to recognize that anybody that doesn't give you the cell phone number isn't serious. You didn't create enough value.
Right.
Because email addresses are so cheap and easy to give out that nobody hesitates to do it for the most part. And if I do hesitate at all I do is I pick the worst email address I have and give it to you. So it's not, my interest level is not being gauged by the fact that I produce you a lead with the name and the email. I'll put in the fake name. I'll put in the bogus email or the email I don't use except for people that are trying to market to me, and I'm done. And whether I go engage with that content or not is probably just as high as anything else. It's terrible.
Yeah. So the way I
don't mind the two-step as long as you recognize where the real value is.
For sure, and I totally get that. And the reason I would go that way, and maybe it's erroneous, but the reason I would go that way and at least test it is some people are going to be hesitant to give the phone number, of course, right? And they'll be less hesitant to give an email address. But through email, or at least getting them to a thank you page, can I change the way they see the world enough for them to give me a cell phone number down the road? Maybe they don't do it immediately. Maybe they do it down the road.
Yeah, you can. I mean, I think in that scenario, your better option is to say, how can we stack the value on part two?
Yeah.
What can we offer that seems almost like we're giving them something that they would have had to pay for by text only? And now we're probably getting closer to what I think is the most effective thing to grow the business. Is what could we give that has such perceived value that they would, and this is the challenge of the web form, is that you have to overcome this hurdle. If you've got a book, and you're saying, okay, buy the book, and you can just slip in the text message and, the checkbox, say, give us permission. Great. That's probably a good place too. That's where, as you start thinking about, well, where can I really bring the compelling call to action into play? What is it that I could give them that really would pique their interest and get them excited? I want to do that. I want to spend more time thinking about that than how do I compromise on my lead capture?
Yeah. All right, I've got one other question, and then Devin's got some questions here. But
go ahead.
Back at SuccessCon 2019, I believe you guys and Infusionsoft had created an integration. Is that integration still active? And I'll explain for those who are listening. It's freaking awesome, because if you use Infusionsoft, or if you're using a ticketing system and you want to switch to Infusionsoft, then your support reps can be logged into the chat in Infusionsoft and handle and respond to text messages through the same platform. Am I remembering that correctly, Ryan?
Yeah, and it's still working.
Awesome. Yeah, that's pretty cool stuff. I'm just thinking about how we can utilize that for customer support as well through text. Get the text conversation going, but our guys are already logged into FuseDev, so they don't have to go log into a separate platform or whatever.
Sure. Yeah.
It's all in one place. Yep.
If you're already using it, then it makes a ton of sense to be doing it that way.
Yep.
Okay, so a couple questions from Devin is, how do you use text to register for a webinar when you have 2 or 3 of the same webinar coming up? Yeah, that's where you start getting into some of the tricky technical aspects, and then you have to make some decisions on doing stuff like that. What I would typically do in that kind of scenario is probably have them text the register keyword, gather their name and email, and then say, click here to indicate which time of day you want to go to. It sounds like it's more work, but the reality, it's a pretty smooth flow for them. And then I'm using a mobile survey that has the 2 or 3 upcoming webinar times, and then I can use that to do branching in terms of registering and sending confirmations and all that kind of jazz.
What about in this series, Brian? This series, you had an opt-in for this series, but there's 4 webinars.
Yeah, I just used 4 different keywords in that scenario to separate them all. If you, like in our case, because we anticipated people would want to attend all 4. By the way, Tyler, you have to attend this one, but I'm going to be doing a bonus one after a discussion I had with Devin yesterday about our dialer, because there's quite a bit in that a lot of people don't know about. So I don't want to encumber you, because I know you only agreed to help me with these 4, but I'm going to do a 5th one for those that are interested. But what happens is we just delay registering, because you could use multiple custom fields to hold all the different links for the different events. In our case, we just decided we wouldn't register people for the next week's event until this week's was over. So an hour or so after this event, we'll unlock the registration process. So we got people queued up that want to register, and then we'll unlock that process and then give them their full confirmation and stuff like that. So that's how we kind of handle that. But if you're having multiples during a week or a period of time in which you're registering people on an ongoing basis, I might think of something more like that to kind of handle it. But, a little more thought, I could probably come up with something better. I'm sure you could too, Devin and Tyler. Okay, can we use the Fix Your Funnel Auto Convo text link in an Infusionsoft email? Or would you recommend having our list that don't have mobile numbers to register? I don't know if I fully understand. Do you understand that question, Tyler?
Not exactly. I mean, you talked about trackable links earlier. You can do that in Fix Your Funnel text, but you can also trigger whatever you want on an Infusionsoft email. So I'm not sure why you would want to take the link from the Fix Your Funnel text and put it in an email. I think that's what he's asking, but maybe I'm fully misunderstanding.
Yeah, Devin, maybe you can explain a little, ask it a different way to help us get it. If you're talking about the link that you tap and then it opens up the messaging, app on your phone with the keyword in it and the phone number already pre-populated, you could send that in an email. I'm more inclined, there's a concept, I don't know if you're asking this or not, but there's a concept that people try to sell in a text message. I actually teach don't sell in a text message. Push people to content and then use the content to sell people. Because the text is so short, relatively speaking, it's impossible to really be really compelling to get people to make a big decision or the bigger decision in 160 characters, or even if it's MMS, the 1600 characters. You're just not going to do it effectively. And so what I would try to do is send people to a page with a video, explain my offer there, and then on that page have the text message call to action if I'm trying to get people to give me that permission. But again, you want to look at reducing. What we're trying to do in marketing and sales all the time is reduce sales cycles, if it's at all possible, right? Some sales cycles have necessity of being a certain length of time, but we wouldn't want them to be any longer than absolutely necessary. So what I'm always looking when I'm designing or working with somebody to design their marketing flow and sales flow is I'm looking to say, okay, where are we trying to get the person mentally? What are we trying to get them to agree to, do, buy, whatever? And then where are they when they start this process? And what is the most direct effective line that we can do between those two that is effective from their perspective. What, you know, so often we force people into a delayed sales process when they don't want that, but we also aren't going to accelerate it if they're not ready for that. So we kind of want to find that balance between the two, where we can allow people to go through as quickly as possible, but also allow people to go as slow as they need to. And so I really want to look through the whole process and think about, okay, what am I doing and how am I getting people there? So that's not easy to give a one answer that fits all sizes, unfortunately. Okay, well, if there's no more questions, it was great having you on, Tyler. Again, thanks for being willing to be on. And
No worries. Thank you. This is great training.
yeah, we're just trying to help. It's a tough time right now. I don't think, unfortunately, we're going to see the full fallout for a little bit. But if you as a small business can adopt these strategies, if you can start thinking a little bit differently about how you approach your business and really get to stay focused on the core of what we're trying to accomplish with each of these parts of our business, you can get great results, even in a downturn, even in an uncertain economy. There's always people buying, always people selling. There's always something going on. Question is, how effective are you at getting the job done? So I referenced before that I have a little training that I did in our Fix Your Funnel user group. If you're not a Fix Your Funnel user and you want to join it to get into that training on Facebook, you can do that. Just tell you in the questions, I'm going to ask if you're a Fix Your Funnel user and say, not yet, but I was on the training or something like that. Otherwise, I won't let you into the group. It's one of the benefits of being a Fix Your Funnel user, is being in the group and all the education we do there. But I did a training on how do you create an irresistible offer. And you want to go through that training to help you think through. It's a thinking process you go through that helps you to really think through the process of what is a great offer. Tyler, I think you said you have a training on that as well.
No, we don't have any specific training on that. We're
Okay.
developing some training on kind of marketing strategy that's going to include that, but we don't have anything right now.
Yeah, it's super important. I know you agree with me 100% because we've talked about it in both of these trainings. You got to have a compelling offer. And so in this training, at least, I go through, it's about 20 minutes long for that one. And it's going to help you to identify a 7-step process to kind of pull out what is at the core of a really compelling offer. It helps you really identify the real problem that your customers have. And it's a pretty foolproof methodology for doing that. And then this week I released another training, which was now how do we take that foolproof method for getting a real clarity on the problem, convert it into a compelling sales presentation. So, and I'm not talking about a lot of the details, but in terms of, there's a ton of things you can do, but I do get into how do you create a compelling argument, a compelling sales conversation based off of that initial training of how do you identify what is the real problem that you can solve, that if you solve it will get everybody excited. So I would encourage you to go through those, because again, these last week's training and this week's training, what we're doing is we're teaching you mechanisms to solve real solid problems that are in every business, and how to utilize texting as part of that. But if you get that compelling offer down, it makes all of this stuff way more effective. And so I want to make sure that you guys know how to do that. Well, thanks so much for joining me. I really do appreciate it. I know we went a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but I feel like it was worth it. So I'm not sorry.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
All right. Thank you. We'll see you